American professor and author Stephen Zunes. Dr. Zunes is a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, where he served as founding director of the program on Middle East Studies. He's one of the foremost scholars of nonviolent civil resistance and has published groundbreaking research on popular resistance to coups.
Here in the United States, there's a very real risk that through various methods, the Republicans could effectively try to steal the 2020 presidential election, and that the Republican-dominated courts would be willing to allow it to happen. Aware of this possibility, a growing number of organizations is organizing for large-scale civil resistance to defend American democracy in the face of possible efforts to thwart the democratic will after Election Day. And fortunately, there is precedent we can learn from. There have been 3 cases in recent decades, 1 in Southeast Asia, 2 in Eastern Europe, in which an incumbent president or party attempted to steal an election only to have it reversed through large-scale nonviolent direct action. We've already heard about 2 of these, the Philippines in 1986 and Serbia in 2000. The 3rd case is Ukraine in 2004. And in looking at these uprisings, the thing that these 3 uprisings have in common that I think those of us in the United States can learn from are the following. Meticulous election monitoring and related, which enabled the did it just disappear?
Yep, your slide disappeared, Stephen.
Strange. Okay, let's try it.
There you go. It's back.
Okay.
It must just be something quirky with the slideshow view. So
okay, but anyway, meticulous election monitoring and related efforts which enabled the opposition to make a convincing case that there was indeed fraud and there had not been a full and accurate count of the vote. Second was mobilization within days. That it became apparent that there are efforts underway to steal the election. Again, it's important to be timely, to be quick before the incumbent regime consolidates power. A third is large-scale non-cooperation, challenging the legitimacy of the incumbent government, including popular contestation of public space, like a main square in the Capitol or other areas of strategic importance. Fourth, of course, is strict nonviolent discipline by the opposition, even in the face of violent repression. And of course, this is critical for all sorts of obvious reasons, especially for regimes who want to maintain the image of trying to uphold law and order. And finally, the uprising having support of both the centrist political groupings whose candidates had been robbed of victory, as well as grassroots elements of civil society to their left. And so again, while we here in the United States, we may not be terribly excited about Biden, the importance of defending the democracy against Trump and all he represents is critical. But similarly, it's important that that the mainstream opposition be willing to accept and endorse extra legal efforts. And could Americans do that in this kind of sense? I mean, on one hand, we have a longer and stronger democratic tradition than most countries, as well as an impressive history of nonviolent resistance. But there are a number of ways that mobilizing successful mass resistance could be more challenging than in the Filipino, Serbian, or Ukrainian cases. One is that in the Philippines, Serbia, and Ukraine, like most countries with presidential systems, the candidate who receives the majority of votes is the winner. With the US president selected by the Electoral College and with a number of other obscure constitutional provisions that could come into effect in case of dispute in terms of the seating of electors, it could make it so that Trump could legally be declared the winner, despite losing the popular vote by a large margin. In that case, would somebody cautious like Biden and the Democratic establishment be willing to endorse a massive extra legal campaign? Could a movement succeed if they were told essentially to give up? Now, if a major resistance campaign was launched anyway, would we be able to convince the establishment to join it? And these are some of the questions that we need to think of. Another issue is that unlike these countries, you have tens of millions of Trump supporters, very right-wing, who have guns. I mean, not just guns, but semi-automatic weapons that they, in most states, are legally allowed to carry around and threaten people with. And even if we were to assume that most regular police and military would not shoot into crowds of peaceful demonstrators, you can't, it's less likely that these right-wing militia could have, would have such hesitation. Another thing but one area where direct action could start before the election is in terms of in-person voting. Trump has called for armed supporters to patrol polling stations in heavily Democratic precincts. And so voters who may be intimidated, especially minority voters, faced with all these white guys with guns, which could be a little triggering, as you might imagine. It would be good if movement activists could engage in unarmed accompaniment of the voters, and to the actual polling stations. And there needs to be plans for specific kinds of mobilizations, including blocking and occupying key governmental, commercial, transport, and other facilities. Such mass actions are important as they galvanize the opposition, encourage participation, prevent business as usual in critical urban centers, and provide excellent footage for sympathetic news coverage. At the same time, seizure of a particular physical space should not be overemphasized. I mean, for example, in the Philippine case, pro-democracy protesters do not need to seize the presidential palace. They just made it so that the presidential palace was essentially the only part of the Philippines Marcos controlled. So while physically occupying a government building or an important geographical center can have some symbolic advantages, what is important is defending the constitutional system, not a particular building or public square. And the defense of society under threat of a de facto coup relies on widespread mobilization, building alliances, nonviolent discipline, and a refusal to recognize illegitimate authority. Again, that is the key, as opposed to occupying any physical space. And again, I want to emphasize the importance of nonviolent discipline. I mean, that's critical to success of anything, any movement like this. And when you look at U.S. history, that the most dramatic nonviolent campaigns that we think of, the civil rights movement, the anti-nuclear power movement, things like that, that they all stress training, nonviolence training beforehand. And we're starting to see this. Training workshops, such as those offered by Choose Democracy, are remotely, given the circumstances of the pandemic, have been ongoing, and they're critically important and better enabling participants to maintain a nonviolent demeanor in the face of provocations. In addition, the threat from agents provocateurs and hot-headed Trump activists require training and deployment of marshals as well to enforce nonviolent discipline.